Welcome to this session where we're going to talk a bit about revision, some ideas, and look at some extended answers, and hopefully give you some ideas to take back to the classroom. So, a little bit of a health warning. Like I said, we're going to have a look at the ideas for revision. I always wonder if people are looking for a panacea. Oh, this is the only way to revise, and I think we've got to. There is no way about it. We have to get students practicing. Um, and that comes through just doing more and more questions. Well, have a look at extended answers. I want to talk about why that's important, and then some of the key ideas around those extended answers, what we can do to guide our students to be able to eke a few more marks out. And throughout it, hopefully, I'll be able to give you some ideas or resources that you can help in the classroom. Because like I've said here, this is the final stretch. I think it's my countdown in my classroom. I may have the maths totally wrong. It's about 50 days to the GCSE maths first paper. Um, and this is the point where it is really important. Kids are generally highly motivated in the main. Most of us will have just done our final mocks, or if you haven't done for statistics, because I know that one of the challenges we will have with statistics, again, depending on your mode of delivery, is getting a mock in place. And I think again, context is key, and there'd be loads of different contexts, at least 50 different contexts out there, where some of you will be delivering it in curriculum time, some will be delivering it as an additional um, option, some will be doing it after school, and trying to then get a formal mock in place. And I think thinking towards 2025, 26, if we want to improve outcomes, we've got to look within our schools as to how we can get a formal mock in place. Because I genuinely do believe that students perform better when they're in the exam hall or in a formal sitting than they do when they're doing it in your classrooms. That personally has come through me. So I am a practicing teacher, so that still in the classroom, still teaching, and I see it with the kind of kids that I teach. My specialism is foundation students, getting them over that grade 4, grade 5, and lower higher tier students. Um, and I do see different outcomes when they're in the exam hall than I do in my classroom. And I think trying to get some kind of formal mock in for next year, I'm just trying to think about the audience out there. Some of you will be heads of departments, some will be teachers, some will be um, other positions within a department. And so throughout this, I've tried to pick up things that will be useful to you, wherever you sit on that scale, for you to take back. At its most basic, we're going to have a look at the skills map, and this is my advice to you as teachers: is get to know your way around the skills maps. I think they are massively underused in all the qualifications, but within maths, we are very lucky that the way maths is marked is that it's either right or wrong, roughly. And I'm going to show you some of the ways that I cut and dice the data. I'm not saying it's the only way, so there are other ways to look at all of the data we're going to have a look at. And some of you will already do it. Some of you will do it in a slightly different way. But this is just from me as a practicing teacher and what I do for maths at level 2 in general. But then straight away, get that command word poster up in your classroom. It's available on the Emporium. Send it to your reprographics person. Get them to print it on. If you've got A2 printers, ideal. If not, A3 is good enough. And have it next to your board, so you can talk about the command words to make them. And this isn't necessarily about exam. This is about being about good practice. And even then, you can write next to it. Well, actually, let's use our own words. Let's explore that, what that means. So we're going to have a quick look at the skills map. Another thing, I was shared this at a different network, but I still think in this final stretch, it's really useful to share with students. So I previously basically sorted the data by the means percentage for each paper. Each question, sorry. And I did this for all 4 papers. There's lots of other stuff included in this, but for this specific couple of slides that I'm going to show you now, just to show to students that, and then when I sorted this by question, so each question, I've then put a column in their position in paper so you can see that question 1 was made up of 4 parts, so that would be position 1 to 4. But when you look at the performance by position in the paper, it's not like GCSE maths. And we need to make students aware of it, because bear in mind they will be sitting numerous exams, and being able to say to them, this is different to GCSE maths, so that they understand that they don't give up. This is about building that resilience, and show them that that difficulty goes up and down within a question, and that even right to question or part question 44, but that might have been like question 13D or whatever, that part was still accessible by 60, i.e. they were successful by 60%. They got 60% of the marks available. So don't do what you might do, and this isn't applicable to all students, but some students, where you get to a point where you go, I can't do that, and then give up. This is about ploughing through and looking for the topics, because each question is generally broadly written around a topic. So they need to keep going until the end. That slide particularly, just before paper 1, I'd be saying, now don't forget, you will see this up and down, not like rampant, easy to hard, which is what you'd expect on a GCSE maths paper. And same for higher paper 1, and that looks like that. And you can see again that up and down goes throughout the whole paper. They keep going till the end. They find, yes, they might not be able to do question 1C, but they're certainly able to keep going right through to question part 44. Really useful. And I've done the same for foundation paper 2. Same story there. You can see there is a general trend that it does get, but I'd certainly be downplaying that with my students to say, but look, we need to be keeping going until the end. So whilst it is that the harder topics are towards the end, within a topic, that difficulty goes up and down, whereas we don't see that in our GCSEs. Again, higher paper 2, same thing, they keep going, and you look at the success, nearly 30 or close to 35% of the marks that were available on part 37. So for some students, that might be the difference between a 4 and a 5, or even an 8 or a 9. And that they go hunting and they continue to have a go every question. And I think that for me is probably the biggest message when it comes to revision, that statistics is different to GCSE. So that's available there on those slides. So when you get the pack, you can make your own presentation ready, because there will be one lesson that you will all have just prior to the exams, or your last lesson talks about what to expect. Because I think that's important, that they really do get that idea that it's different. And then I thought, what is it I am going to teach? What am I going to focus on? So I'm not talking about a hit list, but I am talking about making sure that I'm giving my students the best diet in those last few lessons. So assuming that I've done some kind of assessment where I know where they're at, I will have students that I need to move from a 3 to a 4, or a 4 to a 5, or a 6 to a 7. So I thought I'd have a look at, okay, so what is it that makes a grade 4 student successful on foundation? Which are the difference between a grade 4 and a grade 3? Because that's where, for me, I can give some real personalized feedback to students. Not necessarily feedback, some real It is just honing in on certain areas that I know that will make a difference to them. And it might be that I look at their assessment and go, actually, they've nailed what I think that the rest of the country hasn't done, or that performed badly. Um, and I may have used, in terms of that formal assessment, if you're looking, and it's, I don't know whether I mention it later on, but I probably do the shadow papers. If I don't, I'll talk about it in a bit. So what I did is, again, I've cut and slicing the data slightly different. So you'll see I've taken the skills map. This is what I mean about how useful they are. So I then added some extra columns. So next to a grade 5, you'll see there's that 5%. Next to the grade 4, there's a 4%. Next to the grade 3, there's a 3%. I didn't do the 2s and 1s, but I suppose you could, depending on your context, because you might go, okay, so I've got some students that got a U. What was the difference between the national U and the grade 1? Is there some low-hanging fruit that I can focus on? And some of them really stand out. And this came through I did some face-to-face training with a group of teachers in Manchester a few weeks ago, and we were looking at the GCSE skills maps, and it was an amazing experience, or amazing thing to do, some analysis, where we started going, okay, so our grade 9 students are so much better at this topic than our grade 8 students. Which is why it's not really a frequency analysis. It's none of that. It's not a prediction. It's just looking at the core data and saying, so what did a grade 5 student do that a grade 4 didn't? And what did a grade 4 student do that a grade 3 student didn't do, or didn't perform as well as? And then I heat mapped it. I just did some conditional formatting. And what's really interesting, so when we look at the difference here, is what the difference to a grade 5 for our grade 4 students. And you start going, okay, so there's some really interesting stuff in here. So things like formal notation for independent events, our grade students were performed 40% worse than our grade 5 students. So is there some low-hanging fruit that I can go and make sure that I am teaching that formal notation? And similarly, you look at pie charts. And I might go, actually, why are pie charts performing 26% worse for a grade 4 student compared to a grade 5 student? That's something that there's some dual benefit if I can get some pie charts revision in with my GCSE students. And then pick out, and again, all about context, pick out where you are with your schemes of work, where you are with your year 11s, GCSE maths, and actually go through and say, so the one there, sample space diagrams, using them, grade 4 students perform 27% worse than a grade 5 student. Would that be because the grade 4 students maybe haven't seen a sample space diagram for a while? There's others in there that you go, so arithmetic mean came up twice. Well, maybe that was because the grade 5 students were taught it as a separate topic. I don't know. Again, it's about context. And then, so when you look at the grade 4, the grade 3 students and the difference to a grade 4, there's definitely 3 chunks of red in here that you look at and you go, okay, so my grade 3 student, the grade 4 students performed, again, on some of them, not as much as 40%, but there's certainly some low-hanging fruit, and I've used that lots because I use it a lot at school as well. That maybe there's that cross contamination with GCSE that I'd think, so tree diagrams, 20% worse than a grade 4 student. Could that have a dual impact across both my subjects? And I know that my foundation groups for my GCSE maths, I've just taught tree diagrams. It's part of our scheme of work. But again, go back to that. It's all about context. So that will be on the PDF that you've got. So you can look at that and go, actually, there is some stuff here that makes some sense that we're going to revisit for GCSE maths. And there's some that I need to pick out separately and teach just to my stats students. Then you've got being able systematic sampling, reading from tables, again, arithmetic mean. And then the other chunk down here, and you'd have to go back and have a look at the cross-reference the questions. Again, pie charts, it pops in sample space diagrams. So I only compared the 3 to the 4, not the 3 to the 5, because I thought if I'm moving a kid from a 3 to the 5, it's a bigger jump. So were you to do that analysis, you probably, I suppose it's quite easy to do. So I'm looking at arithmetic mean, question 8B1, foundation, grade 5 students got 57%, grade 4 students got 30%, but our grade 3 students only got 14%. So looking for those opportunities to, one, cross-contaminate with my maths, and I know it's not to contaminate, it's not the word, make some dual wins for both subjects, but also then picking out those that are specific to stats only. And again, I didn't want to go into too many specifics because of your context out there. The blue on the far right-hand side, the questions are where they're higher and foundation, so the crossover questions. So some of you might be teaching in groups where you teach higher and foundation together. I might go, okay, my level 1 intervention's going to be those where it's red in both columns and it's a blue crossover question, because that's the way we teach it within our school. I've got higher and foundation, and then you might, as you get closer to the exams. And I just thought that was really nice to share. So we're going to have a look at all 4 papers. And I've done the same kind of thing, slightly different with higher tier, in that I thought for the higher tier, I looked at, because this was picked up as something that people have fed back to me saying, what do we do about our high flyers? So I've done something similar, looking at the difference between a grade 8 student and a grade 9 student, and then a grade 7 and a grade, but I've done the grade 7 to a grade 9. I could have done it, and again, you can do it with your own skills map. You may have gone, well, actually, I think I only want to shift. I'm thinking about shifting grade 7s to grade 8s. I just know from experience, sometimes it's easier to shift a 7 to a 9. Not easier than shifting them to an 8. That's nonsense. But moving them to a 7 to a 9 is doable. Um, and again, you might look and go, because of context, I'm going to look for the stuff that's in the commonly assessed items. And you'll see here, the blues on the left, there isn't so much of the reds. Well, there isn't. There's one, I think, selectifying and just, oh no, comparative pie charts, but that's not even a blue question. And it's as to be expected, a lot of this now for your higher tier, again, context because of the papers. And when you look, so I've said about shifting it, we're looking at the grade 8 to a grade 9. It's not necessarily the back end of the paper, because you'll see there question 5, question 6, question 9, and question 8 as areas that we can focus on. Similarly, the 9, when you look at the second column, you've definitely got some reds down towards the end. So I might be, again, if I was teaching higher and found all of the kids in one group, I think at this point, when you're getting onto your real extreme top end, even your grade 9s are not going to be a detriment by doing some of the stuff that your grade 8s or grade 7s would benefit from. And again, there's some stuff I do that same thing about what's going to be mutually beneficial. That was the phrase I was thinking of. Mutually beneficial for both my qualifications in the first instance. So it's almost a phase one is, again, depending on your context, where can I benefit both my qualifications? Because I think that's important. Then the phase two is where am I benefiting just the stats? And this is an interesting exercise for you to take away and do for maths as well. And this isn't about hit lists or priorities. This is about improving outcomes for students, and improving their understanding of the qualification. And then we go back to foundation paper two. Slightly different um, look to it, but there's some great opportunities in here. Again, looking at what the grade four students compared to the five and the three to a four. And you might be sat there going, "Oh, I would have looked at the three to the five as well." And that's the point of this. It's about sparking ideas for you to go off, rather than us just dishing out, "Oh, and here's one." Because I think sometimes you need to engage with the data, um, and that means sometimes producing it. So when we look at some areas here, again, the box plots, the reading there, the difference between a three and a four and a five. That primarily I suspect is down to the lots of those grade four students won't have seen them for higher, so higher GCSE maths. So we need to make sure we are explicitly teaching them, and you'll see there's the same thing. So our grade three students only got 18.7% on those reading box plots questions. So great opportunity there. And again, for me, part of the reason of being able to identify some of these areas is to be able to prove that these networks are working, these producing this, and you coming along, being able to look at it next year and go, okay, so the reading box plots, I know it's not exactly the same question, but when we look at that skill, when we test it, are we seeing an improvement year on year? Are we getting better in terms of how we teach it? And then further down, you'll see there's the 31%, I think that is cumulative frequency graphs comparing. So there's some opportunity for our foundation students to think about, how am I making sure that my foundation students are seeing the stuff that would be on higher tier maths at GCSE, your cumulative frequency, your box plots. And am I doing that timely enough, um, in order for it to be fresh in their memory when they're going into these exams? Um, and when we look at, it definitely jumps out there, and there's a big chunk of stuff, um, scatter diagrams that are different for our grade three to our grade four students. That for me is almost that phase one where I'm looking, going, okay, so there's that stuff that are mutually beneficial to both my qualifications. Definitely the scatter graphs. Um, then some of them might go further down, like the chloropath reading. That might be something I come to the point again about context. And I know that in the past, my previous school, we had students in the day before the stats exam, specifically the last stats exam. And we had them in for a whole day because there was nothing else on that day. So we've done all sorts of stuff just to try to look at stuff that's exclusive to statistics. And at that point, I am really mindful of, because there are topics that come up on higher tier GCSE maths that are on foundation, um, GCSE stats. It's really, it's a very fine balance. And I know some of you, I hope some of you will agree. You really don't, again, because some of you might be delivering the stats within your maths lessons, you really don't want to confuse them at this point with your GCSE maths for them to go off and um, revise stuff that's not useful for their GCSE maths. Um, and you do need to guide students when it comes to GCSE. one of my students very recently said to me, but I am revising, miss, look. And this was for GCSE maths. And he'd got a book out where he had written all of those A-level trigonometry ratios. So cosec, he'd written down. None of them he'd even seen in my maths lesson. So we do need to guide them more, and even more so with stats, to make sure that we don't want this to have a knock-on effect, but equally we don't want to add maths. Equally, we don't want maths to have a detrimental effect to this. So looking at when am I going to teach, for example, or when am I going to give them something on chloropleth maps? I'm certainly not going to do it in a maths lesson just before a maths GCSE, but I might do some work on scatter diagrams because that's mutually beneficial. Um, and I think that's the art of teaching or the planning to do with teaching at this point is being really selective about what and when. And I'm hoping that makes sense and sounds sensible to lots of you. So then when we look at higher paper two, exactly the same. Again, looking between a 7 and a 9 and an 8 and a 9. And you can see here we got regression equations, amongst others. There's other stuff in there. Relative risks, the data collection process, formal notation, and it wasn't necessarily things that you might think. So things like Spearman's rank, that wasn't too badly. The performance on those weren't too bad compared with the 7 and a 9 and 8 and a 9. It was other topics. And some of them, when we look at interpreting regression equations for a grade 7 student, there, 63% was probably the worst comparative percentage that we had. And that might be a great one. So all of those regression equations, because that comes on as well when we're using them. For those one-off lessons where you're focusing just on stats, because I'm not sure how useful it is for your GCSE maths. But then some of it you go, well, actually, some of the other stuff in there. So like your formal notation would be pushing on that was 50% performed 50% worse for your grade 7 students to your grade 9 students. Yet some of those grade 7 students will be going on to do A level either in your centre or other sites. So introducing them to that extreme, and I know we shouldn't teach to the test, and I try not to, but there may be points where you go, these students, I'm not going to teach that, or I'm not going to push it on because we'd get to the point where that Peter principle, where you've pushed them to the point of incompetence. Um, but then start thinking about, well, how useful will some of this be to them if they go on to do A-level maths or core maths? Because I know some of those that like the regression equation stuff is really useful for your core maths. So that was the first thing I thought I'd share because I think that's will give you some focus. Um, but like I say, it is all context. Um, but it does allow, and I've said there, to delve deeper. But and you could have, again, depending on your context, looked at how do I shift my ones and twos to a 3, or how do I shift my 4, 5s, and 6s on hires further up. But we had to start somewhere, and it may be that one of the networks we look at next year, if people's feedback from having just seen that is okay, so what is it a grade 4 student does that a grade 3 student, or what does a grade 4 student perform better at than a grade 3 student at, based on this summer's data, and looking at specific, because I think for me, it's really useful. And it was really useful to the group of teachers when I did this face to face in Manchester. And I haven't got time to go into, but when you look at, I had a ruler and I was going line by line, and you go, no, surely, and it's stark on some of them how much better the grade 9 students should perform to a grade 7 students, or how much better a grade 5 student compared to a grade 3 student. Um, and there was a couple there that made me stop and think that shouldn't be the case. Is it because they're not being taught it, or is it because there's something fundamental? And then it made me go away and think, I'm going to make sure my kids get that really, really well. Um, but then part of this network is also then looking at, um, I did say it's all about context, looking at some extended answers. Why we're looking at this is that when we looked at the lower performing topics in a previous session, which is available on the PD Academy, the recording, um, I ignored quite a few topics. Not because I didn't think they were important, but I did say at the time that the common theme that came through was that justifying being, is it appropriate, not appropriate. There was a few in there where they were what are seen as extended answer questions. And I wanted to do it justice. Because when we're talking about extended answer questions, they're meaty topics, they're meaty questions. The the value to the students, I didn't think we could do justice while talking about appropriateness. So we said we'd do it as this dual session where we'd have a little bit more of a deeper look at some of the extended answers from last summer and some of the lessons that we could be taking back. Um, so what the first question that came up is all to do, and I'm going to go into some of the other stuff that we can do to improve it after I've gone through some of the things that students aren't doing, that can give you some ideas on maybe not necessarily for this summer, some of them will be longer term. So when we look at this, it's a 6 mark question. Um, what was interesting about this question, um, basically they were required to critique the plan. Um, they were prompted, so they're given a prompt on the 3 areas. Um, and within the final line, it says discuss whether or not they are appropriate. Um, and so where students were able to gain the full marks for each of the different subsections, they did comment on that appropriateness. So again, it is linked to the previous session we did. Um, so they commented on the appropriateness to say that it wouldn't be representative. Um, the mark scheme did allow for the opposite of what most people said, so it allowed it. However, they really struggled with commenting on whether the calculations proposed were appropriate. Um, and what was being looked for was to comment on whether the average was appropriate. And so some students were thinking that the average was the mean, so did not notice that the type of average had not been specified. Um, so again, thinking back to the previous network when we spoke about appropriateness and how we have to talk about it in almost everything that when we're doing statistics, is it okay to do this? Is it appropriate? Tell me why. Or, oh no, that's not a good idea. Tell me why. Um, so that wasn't answered very well. Is that a knowledge thing? Is it because students are really what comes through is they're really good at carrying out the process. So they're really good at carrying out finding the mean or the mode or the range or the interquartile range. Um, and then not so good at talking at the written part about discussing why. Um, for the diagrams, what we were looking for was comments about the lines of saying that the bar chart is appropriate or saying it's not appropriate because the data were continuous. The data was continuous, so you were allowed, that was covered with it again within the mark scheme. Occasionally, candidates are too vague. And with this, it was really evident, so much so that it was commented on. It was unfortunate to see so many blank responses. It was designed with foundation students in mind and thought to be very accessible prior to the sitting. And it was a real shame to not see students scoring more marks. And some did write really wrong answers discussing the data collection and hadn't thought about because the space was really limited for 6 marks to what you see there. So we have to start thinking about what else within our skills backpack are we giving students. It's not just about the arithmetic or the process. We've now got to think about, okay, so there's 3 points. I'm going to split my page in three. And almost that exam strategy, and that it might not always be exactly three, but if they can split it in three, that would be great. But the blank answers for me is the low hanging fruit on this one. We get them to write something because for something, they're more likely to get a mark than they are if there's nothing. They're not going to get a mark. And I just thought that was a really interesting because that's part of the statistical inquiry cycle, which I'm going to talk about once I've shown you some of the issues. So that was the first question. The second extended answer, or deemed to be an extended answer, was part C on this question. And it basically required them to compare the 2 or 3 box plots. And you would have seen this was one of the ones which our grade 3 students performed worse than the grade 4 and our grade 4 students. And many students, again, didn't attempt it and left it blank. But actually being able to compare distributions is a skill that, and I think it's a great opportunity because it is very much it's accessible to all students. I think personally, um, um, lots of students on this one. Again, it's a specific skill. We have to tell them what it is we need to compare. So many students compared the minimum and the maximum values rather than the upper, rather than the medians or the interquartile or the range. It was almost like they thought the comparisons involved the data that was there. And yes, the interquartile range is there. And yet, for some students, they don't seem to see that as a trigger. Um, it didn't require any context, just needed to require them to interpret it as well. And I know that's the real high level skill when we're talking about it. So below my slides, and I usually say this at the beginning, is that if you have a look at the notes pages below the slides, there's loads of other text I've put in there for you to have a read that you might go, actually, um, just talking about they must make a comparison, some using the word medium instead of median, um, or incorrectly calling the median the average or the mean. Um, but all of that is in the notes page below. The next extended response question from last summer um, was this was a crossover question. So it was foundation paper 1 and higher question 3. Foundation students struggled with this. I'm not sure whether there was a generalization that seem to feel foundation students struggle with the extended response questions. I don't want it to feel like that because I do think it is. It shouldn't be the case, and in some, it's not always the case. Um, those that could answer it extracted the correct percentages, um, and then the very best responses went on to calculate the percentage of 40, the number of males aged 40 to 44 in both France, and then went on to discuss the validity of the two claims. Um, and just to say, and you'll see there, my solution there, claim one's correct, claim two is incorrect, and backing it up. But on higher, it was slightly different. So again, the notes page talks about, we'll go into the difference between higher and foundation students. So there is, and when we're talking about the student population of all the students that entered the quals. Um, and on higher, the vast majority of higher students were able to gain some marks. So what is it we're doing with our higher students that we're not doing with our foundation students? Is it because our foundation students rarely get extended response questions? Again, it could be context, and how the qualification's been delivered, but we need to make sure we're factoring in that opportunity to deliver, for them to have a go at these kind of questions and model what it looks like. And then higher paper 2 question 8 was similar to the the extended response question on the foundation, where it was talking about data collection calculations, but this one's talking about data collection and processing. The vast majority had a really good go at this on higher. So again, what is it we're doing differently to higher than foundation? Very few blank responses on this compared to foundation. So is it because our higher students are getting the opportunity to have a go, or is it because our foundation students are not? I genuinely don't know. I know what I do in mine, and I'd hope to think that, oh, well, um, but we are doing something nationally, something slightly different between the two. Some students gave statements that were too simple, and not it, there wasn't a clear chain of thought. And again, for 6 marks here, they was given slightly more space. Um, and some students put a load of things um, that didn't really, they contradicted themselves. They almost tried to fill the space. And what we're really looking for is that um, we were looking for 6 valid statements somewhere within all of their text. Common correct observations. Um, again, the notes page on that, I have to say, is massive. But that will go into some things that, from a pedagogical point of view, um, would be interesting for some of you. So it goes into, it was rare to see students suggesting to draw a histogram to show the shape of the distribution, and instead would make reference to drawing curves but not naming them. A common incorrect approach was to describe presented data in scatter graphs and calculated Spearman's rank. Um, but again, all of that, if you want to go into mega detail, is in the notes page below. Um, so what can we do about it? So there's a couple of things we can do. Oh, okay. I'm always going to refer to the Emporium because it is a absolute gem. In the GCSE stats folder, um, have a look at, make sure you're aware of what the statistical inquiry cycle is. So both of those 6 markers involved collecting, planning, collecting, processing, presenting, and interpreting data. So get your head around what that means. because and it says there that any question can assess one stage of the statistical inquiry cycle or more than one stage. Um, so that runs throughout the topics. But then to help you with that, within the GCSE stats folder, there is a folder called Statistical Inquiry Cycle. And there's some practice papers in there. Definitely worth having a look. So I've tried to think about short-term things that we can do between now and June, but also some of the other stuff we can do to make sure we can be a little bit more proactive. So this is almost reactive and then proactive. So check out the statistical inquiry cycle practice paper. And then, and I referred to this last time, don't give up on the previous GCSE stats qualification. So there's a folder there called Legacy Quals, and in the old GCSE stats folder, there's the controlled assessment. The old controlled assessment, it's the old coursework. And I'm not saying we deliver coursework, but there's some really great things that you could do as projects. Not reactionary, nothing you can do between now and the summer, but certainly with your year 10s or even your year 9s. And there's nothing in there that's detrimental to your GCSE maths. Have a look at some of those old controlled assessments. Um, I'm not saying we then produce the massive paperwork that the kids do, but we can certainly do the let's form a hypothesis. I remember I resat my GCSE to see if I could get an A star when A stars were introduced. God, I was a nerd. I still am. Um, and I had to do some controlled assessment, and I did the one about I chose to do um something to do because it was statsy between the number of words in a broadsheet and a tabloid, and then ended up producing some but that kind of thing where we're getting students again that's beneficial for both qualifications. Again, depend on your context where you're when you can do that. But go back and see if you can stick it in your year 9 scheme of work. If there's, again, you might not be putting all your students in for stats, but if you are, and get them used to what that's inquiry cycle, because especially all of that was taken out the GCSE maths. So questionnaires, um, tally charts, allegedly. Um, but the questionnaires and that front end of the SEC was taken out GCSE maths last time, so which is why it is going to have to be or is assessed specifically here. So certainly that there's the old Mayfield one. It's all in the Emporium, and then I said I'm going to come back and mention it. We've put there bold and underlined and stars the shadow papers for GCSE stats, I have to say, are superb. So hoping that we've they're superb. So they are the same skills being tested, but it's not always a case of just tweaking the numbers. New data sets have been used. So they look like there's a different story about it. So don't be afraid to make sure to use those, even if you have used the normal Summer 24 papers. The shadow papers are really, really good. Um, the difficulty you've got is which order do you teach, which papers do you use? Because it's not like it's because every topic could get tested on both. And I might be tempted to use a set of papers on each before each exam, paper 1, paper 2. Definitely worth looking at. The aiming for papers that were produced, again, the way they were done, were based on students' performance. So the average, how a grade 7 student performed and the topics that they found particularly well. And you might go, actually, I've got a student here that's targeted at grade 7. They're not doing so well on that. They didn't perform so well on that question. So go and have a look at those. And then in terms of other support, the new Facebook page um, for both GCSE maths and statistics. It's quite nice to watch. It pops up and it seeing people then asking questions or sharing ideas, sharing websites. Um, and that's what these events are about, is trying to create a little community. We've also got Vicky's created some new schemes of work, mapping it against the GCSE maths. So you might think about how, again, context. What do I need? What do I need to explicitly teach that's stats only? Because everything else, the other topics get um, taught within my GCSE maths. There is my email address. I will put, and then in terms of Pearson's contacts, you've got Vicky Wood, who is the face, except it's not a face, the fingers behind the Facebook, and behind the email. Then you've got Nicola, Amy, of course. Um, we've then got the textbook. I love the textbook. Um, uh, but you don't. We have to say at this point, you don't need any of these published resources to deliver the course. They are just there uh, for you and available for people to buy if they wish to. Another shout out, if you've got kids and you're looking for enrichment for GCSE, that EMC um, podcast. Don't forget the PD Academy. You'll get asked to fill in a feedback form. And I always end these sessions by saying, if there was only one thing in that you found was useful, it's worth doing. Because I've sat in numerous sessions where you think that was worth it. That was the one point that I think I've got. Um, at which point I will let you, and I'm hoping wherever you are, it is as sunny there as it is here. Um, and like I say, I hope at least one thing was useful. So thank you for coming and hopefully see you next time.